Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy. This is episode number 146. All this late night talking leads to emotional intimacy. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me for today's podcast episode, where we are going to be talking about the value and importance of emotional intimacy. Now, I think for most women listening to this, it's going to be a no-brainer. We are going to be thinking, yes, we need the connection. We need to feel emotionally connected to our spouse. That is a huge component for us, especially when it comes to intimacy and wanting to be sexually intimate with our spouse. But we want to really kind of dissect this a little bit more and jump into a little bit of a deeper understanding of emotional intimacy and just how powerful it can actually be. So, as I was thinking about this podcast, the song from Harry Styles, All This Late Night Talking, kept coming to my mind because I just had this amazing experience a few days ago with Nick where we ended up talking super late in the night. And I was like, wow, this hasn't happened for so long. It reminded me of our dating years, our dating time. And so I thought it would be really good to start off this podcast by having everyone just reflect back to what it was like when you were dating your spouse. Just think back for a minute. Think about when you were getting to know each other and when you guys were dating, and see if you can find in your memories if you guys had a late night where you guys just stayed up and talked, sharing your past experiences, things that you've learned, sharing about your family, your thoughts and ideas about different things in the world. See if you can remember that experience and the feelings that you had when you stayed up talking and getting to know each other better. If we allow our brain to go back to those memories, we're probably going to feel good right now in the moment that we think about what that experience was like. And that's powerful to be able to think back and feel good now about an experience you already had with your spouse. So as we continue on, I want to really talk about this concept of our emotions and intimacy and how they really work together. So when we think about things that are related to our emotions and really connecting with somebody else through our emotions, this really has to do with our feelings, right? These are the vibrations in our bodies that we experience, and we can label our feelings with one word. So the way we would do that is saying like, I feel, and then you use one word, like, I feel happy, I feel peaceful, I feel confused, I feel stressed, I feel pressure or overwhelmed. So feelings are these one word descriptors, right? A lot of times we want to say, I feel like this, and then we have like 10 sentences. And we want to make sure that we really recognize that those are our thoughts that are actually triggering and causing our feelings to show up. But if we want to really start to feel more connected to our spouse, there is power in just saying this 3-word sentence. I feel, and then say that one feeling. I feel stressed. And we don't always have to have like a million reasons and a big long explanation about that. Watch what happens. I want you guys to try and experiment with this. Just say, I feel this. You can do it with positive emotions, but you can also do it with negative emotions, and just watch what happens either with your spouse or your kids or whoever else is around you when you say that. So just say that 3-word sentence and then just observe. It usually piques the curiosity of those around you because they don't hear people just say like, I feel this, and then just watch for the response. And so it will probably pique their interest a little bit. Now, this is a very healthy way to communicate our feelings. And I love this because this is in the form of an I statement, which makes the other person, our spouse, easy. It makes it easier for them to actually hear what we're saying without getting defensive, right? Because we're not using words that are blaming. We're not saying, you make me feel stressed. We're just saying, I feel stressed. And so it allows them to be a good listener. It allows them to kind of tap into their own curiosity about why you might be stressed, or their own compassion. And it comes from within themselves. It's not being forced onto them. And so their experience of you just stating how you feel is going to be very different than if you were to say, you're making me feel this. And so that is a much healthier way to communicate, and it allows your spouse to go through their own organic process of taking the information that you're expressing and put it into their own mind and start to think about it. So it allows them to do that in a way that feels more natural for them, and not like there's an agenda that you want them to react a certain way. So if we move over to the concept of intimacy and how we define intimacy, intimacy is to become familiar with. And my favorite definition is to make known. So if we think back on these late night talkings while we were dating, we were making parts of ourselves known to our future spouse. And we enjoyed that. There was a beauty in that type of connection and that sharing, making yourself known to your spouse. And we can continue to do that today. It doesn't matter how long you've been married. There are always new things that can trigger new thoughts and inspire us in new ways, that we can share new ideas with our spouse and emotions that it ignites within ourselves. So I want to talk about an actual experience that happened with me and Nick a few nights ago, because it was this late night talking and we didn't plan for it. In fact, the day before or the night before, we had an incredible intimate experience together. There was a long amount of foreplay. And so we had an amazing sexual experience. All the pleasure parts of the brain were definitely activated for me. And I was like, that was amazing. Yes, I would love to return back for more of that. But at the same time, the next day, things were not going according to plan. It was kind of just a chaotic day. Everything was taking a left turn. We weren't being able to accomplish what we wanted, especially for me. And I remember my stress level just kind of creeping up throughout the day. And I remember thinking as we headed into the night, like, oh, I'm so glad like we had such an awesome intimate experience last night, because I don't know if today's going to be a good day for me. My stress is high, and hope, Nick's probably not expecting for us to be sexually intimate tonight. We just did it yesterday, and we really try to release all the sexual expectations that we have, that things should be a certain way. So again, it was a super stressful day, and towards the evening, so many things had just gone wrong that Nick and I were like, we're just done. We just need to watch a basketball game and enjoy it. And that was also frustrating because things didn't go the way we wanted for our team. And it was taking us late into the evening. So after we watched the basketball game, we still felt pretty unsettled and wanted to relax even more. So we decided to just watch an episode of a show. And we did that. And afterwards, it seemed like we would probably just go to bed. And then a very interesting thing happened. And my husband asked me a question that he just had never asked before. And it surprised me. And I was like, ooh, he's never asked me this question before. This is kind of exciting. I'm tired and I'm stressed, but this is kind of like really lighting a fire within me. And the question he asked was, or what he said was, I noticed your energy today. Like, what was going on for you? And I was like, energy? Wow, we don't really have lots of conversations about energy. And so it really was fascinating to me. And I was like, oh, okay, I better think about that. What was my energy today? And I just remember the words coming out of my mouth was expressing how I was feeling. And I said, I felt overwhelmed today. And he was surprised that that was the feeling that I actually felt most of the day. It's not a feeling that I always feel. And I try to keep my life very balanced so that I don't get to that place. But since everything was going wrong, I was feeling overwhelmed. And so I said I was feeling overwhelmed. And he was like, okay, that surprises me. I didn't think it was overwhelmed. Like, what was going on for you? Why did you feel overwhelmed? And so I just started to kind of talk, and it wasn't like blaming or, hey, you didn't do this right, or I wish you would have done things different, or it was none of that. It was me just kind of like, this is what was going on for me. It was coming in multiple directions and areas. And I just kind of expressed my experience of the day. In response, he kind of did the same thing. He said, like, that sucks that you felt that. I didn't know that was going on for you. I could just tell that you were feeling something. And he didn't try to fix anything or solve everything that I had just told him. He just said, yeah, that would be challenging. It's not fun to feel that. And then I asked him, like, what was going on for you today? And then he expressed what was going on for him. And the emotion he was feeling was pressure. He felt a lot of weight and that there was pressure. And that also surprised me. I wouldn't have suspected that that's what he was feeling. And then he listed all the reasons why. And I remember as he was explaining his experience of the day to me, I was surprised because it was an emotion I wasn't thinking he was feeling. But then I also felt a lot of compassion, like, oh my gosh, like those things that are on his mind they haven't even crossed my mind. And I was kind of grateful that they weren't crossing my mind, because I would probably also feel even more weight and more overwhelmed than what I was already experiencing. And so I felt a lot of compassion for what my husband was going through, and even how different it was from what I was going through. And like, wow, we both had very interesting days with very different feelings going on. And so then I just tried to be also sympathetic and empathetic to his experience and not try to solve everything for him, but just be that listening ear. And it's interesting because if I think back at the end of the conversation, was anything solved? Like, did we have all these plans in place of tomorrow, like we're going to just do everything different? Like, not really. Yeah, maybe a couple of ideas were thrown around here and there, but that wasn't even the point of the conversation, to like solve and change and fix everything. It was just to make our feelings known, to make ourselves known to our spouse, even some of the crappy stuff, like the crappy feelings, the crappy times. And this is so valuable, right? Because humans aren't made to only feel like maybe three emotions, three feelings in marriage. But sometimes our brain will think that, like, I need to keep going. I need to be positive. I need to be happy. And I can't let my spouse know about some of these negative feelings, right? Sometimes we really try to push down and suppress negative feelings. But of course, that's not healthy to do that. And so being able to express our feelings in a healthy way can really be connecting and bonding in a marriage. So what are some of the challenges that we face in marriage when it comes to emotional intimacy? I think a lot of times is we just have expectations of what that is supposed to look like. And I think maybe for husbands, they might be a little bit fearful of this, thinking like, oh my gosh, if my wife shares her emotions, it's going to be like a 3-hour process and she's going to want me to fix everything. And let's really be honest about what it means to be an adult. We can usually solve our own problems, right? Like at this point, we have probably shown enough maturity to pay our bills, pay the mortgage, feed our children. We know how to get things done. And sometimes we can maybe hide a little bit from the emotional sharing of our feelings because we think we're going to have to do all this extra work and we don't feel like prepared that we can handle more of somebody else's stuff when we can't even handle our own. And so that can become a challenge and it can keep us from wanting to connect emotionally. Now, the challenge with this is that when we don't feel like we're connecting emotionally, it's going to be more difficult, especially for women to want to share their sexual side with their spouse, their physical body. The emotional connection is the biggest contributor to their body going into the phase of sexual arousal. And so if we are skipping that step of really connecting on an emotional level ahead of time, before sexual activities, we are really going to struggle with being able to tune into how our body feels during sex. And arousal is going to be a big challenge because our brain is going to start thinking negative thoughts about our spouse or how we wanted a better connection before we jumped into the sexual experience. And when we're thinking negative thoughts, we're going to feel negative feelings. And it's hard to get into arousal with negative feelings. We need positive feelings. Women especially need positive feelings before we get into arousal. It's the biggest contributor. So we really need to pay attention. And if for the husbands who are listening to this, a lot of times women don't really recognize this. They know it deep down, but they don't know like that there's an order for them and that our emotions are huge, a huge spark and an igniter. Our emotions are a huge igniter for our arousal system to be activated. So husbands, pay attention to your wife's emotions because that can really help you understand if moving forward into arousal is going to be a challenge for her or if it's going to be easy. It will be based on her emotions. So this is a wonderful opportunity to really tune into your wife. And for all the wives, tune into yourself. Tune into the thoughts that are creating the feelings that you're having. If you're having negative feelings, it's time to do some thought work and really challenge yourself as to why you're choosing to think negative thoughts when you could be thinking empowering thoughts or relaxing thoughts or just different thoughts that will create a different feeling within you. If we think about the story that I started off with, this late night talking and the emotional connection that happens when we do that, think about, what if we did that now? Even if we've been married for 22 years and we went on a date last night and we stayed out late, or the week before, what if we really had the intention to have a late night where we just talked? We talk about current events or whatever, things that are happening in the world, the good and the bad. What if we did that? We can feel connected to our spouse just in that process for what it is all by itself, without like this end goal or an expectation. And as we listen to what our spouse is sharing and expressing, we can have an appreciation for their viewpoint and how it's different than ours and how they view the world differently than we do. And we can feel grateful for what they think about and how it's different than what we think about, because we can cover more ground that way. We don't always have to be thinking the exact same things. And sometimes we do put that expectation on our spouse that they should be thinking about the same things I'm thinking about. And they should be thinking about things in the same way I am. Well, this rarely happens. We're two individuals, and we do need to come together on how we do certain things as a couple, especially when we have kids. But being able to appreciate the difference can give us a lot of compassion and excitement and appreciation. Now, the thing that's awesome about that is those emotions, those feelings of gratitude and appreciation and compassion, those are positive emotions. And so when we're feeling those things, it unlocks our desire to go into arousal and be close and intimate with our spouse. That comes naturally. We don't have to force it. And a lot of times women will be sexually intimate with their spouse out of duty and obligation. And so that can be very conflicting if they have competing feelings. Like, I'm doing it out of duty. I'm not in the mood. I don't really feel the desire. I can't activate my arousal right now, but I'm doing it out of duty. Yeah, they go through the same process that their husband is. They're involved in the same activity as sex, but they're having two completely different experiences. The husband's may be great, but because the wife's thoughts and feelings are more on the negative side, she's having a not so great experience with intimacy. So we really have an opportunity to challenge the thoughts that we're having so we can create more of those positive emotions. And there are a lot of positive emotions to have. It doesn't just have to be like, I just have to feel happy and then go into intimacy. Like, I love the one of feeling appreciative or even feeling empowered in our own lives can easily open the door for desire and arousal to take place naturally. So in today's society, both husbands and wives are taught the male arousal system. And so the female arousal system is pretty much missing in most things that are out there. And so we're usually just lacking that awareness and that information. And so part of this podcast and the goal of my coaching and my husband's coaching is to put the female experience and the process of arousal back into the equation. And the biggest part of that is how we are feeling. And of course, our thoughts trigger that. So thought work is going to be at the core of creating deeper emotional connection. So as we wrap up this episode, I just want to give you a couple ideas of how to move forward in a positive way with this concept. So one idea would be to just let go of all sex expectations, right? For the wife, this might be like letting go of the idea that we should only have sex one time a week or once a month or only when these three things are met, right? We just need to let that go. And for the husbands, he might need to let go of the expectation of like, well, we're married, so we should be having a lot of sex and we should be having sex twice a day because we're married and we're allowed to do that. And this is the time to do that. When we have those expectations, it does add a ton of pressure. It adds some resentment, and it doesn't allow for things to happen organically. When we have expectations and they don't get met, we will go into, childhood temper tantrum mode, but we'll do it as adults. So we'll end up having hidden agendas and controlling tactics, and we'll be critical or try to guilt trip our spouse into doing things, or we'll try to manipulate them. None of these are good. And none of these foster like true intimacy. So we want to let go of all sex expectations and really challenge ourselves to create opportunities for closeness to happen on a more frequent basis, but without like, it has to lead to this. It has to lead to sex. The other idea is to introduce something new. And I'm not talking about sex toys or porn. We're not talking about any of that. But maybe talk about something you guys haven't talked about before, right? Maybe something that's happening in the world, something that you've just never entered into a conversation about. Like my husband did when he asked me about my energy for the day. I was like, wow, that's new. We haven't talked about that, and that's exciting. If you're wondering about what new things you can talk about, I want to offer a freebie to you. Because sometimes we think that in order to ignite this arousal in ourselves and our desire and to become more interested in the sexual activities of a couple or the sexual side of ourselves, that we always have to think about sex. And this is just so not true. We need to just really release that, because it is not true. We can think about all kinds of things that are not related to sex and have it connect us to our spouse emotionally. And then a lot of times it just naturally leads to that desire to want to be intimate with our spouse, because we are talking about things other than sex. Now, talking about sex is very beneficial, and sometimes we need to have those discussions. But what I want to offer to you today is something that we call the 24 intimacies. And this is to really trigger an interest and a curiosity that's genuine within yourself. Like 24 intimacies. Are there 24? Like I thought there was only like one or two, right? And when we only think about intimacy in one or two ways, we really limit our experience with our spouse and all the things that we could be creating and experiences that we could be creating on purpose that would naturally lead to intimacy. So I want to offer you this freebie, 24 intimacies, and you can just print it out, and it will list the 24 intimacies and just give you a brief description. It's not detailed. It's just to kind of spark your interest. And then there are questions at the end, like which one caught your attention? Which one surprised you? Which ones are the ones that made you feel like super excited? And it just is to help you start thinking about things differently and to introduce new things like, oh, my husband and I can be intimate about finances, like financial intimacy. Is that a thing? Oh my gosh. But if you are able to talk about finances in a new way, and it's just fun, and you're able to talk about your dreams and how to finance your dreams, that creates a new connection outside of the bedroom, outside of sex, that says, oh my gosh, we took care of this thing outside the bedroom. Now I want to take care of things inside the bedroom. It just feels natural. We're getting things done together. We're having these awesome conversations. So this freebie gives you just some sparks of ideas. It's meant to just ignite the little embers within ourselves so that we can expand how we think about intimacy. So allow your brain to really think about that. 24 intimacies. 24. And the more we spend time on the intimacies that are outside the realm of the sexual intimacy, it just leads to sexual intimacy naturally. We don't have to force it. We don't have to go into things out of duty and obligation. We're going to actually want to be intimate and close with our spouse. Now, once you read through these intimacies, pick one And maybe just focus on that one and try to introduce it into the relationship and see how you can create new experiences based on just that one intimacy for a little while, and then move on to another one. And I also want to point out that in the Make It Meaningful membership, these intimacies, these 24 intimacies, are a key component. It's one of the 5 pillars that we discuss in the membership. And so in the membership, we go into much more detail on these intimacies. So we end up doing 2 a year because we do have the different pillars that we focus on each month. So if these intimacies spark your interest and you're like, yes, I want to get into these intimacies even more, then really I would encourage you to join the Make It Meaningful membership so you can really take a deeper dive. Okay, so that wraps up our podcast for today. And just remember that this week, try to have one of those late night talkings and connect and share your feelings using that 3-word sentence. Because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you will join me again next week.